Okay, so we received a fresh batch of primaries and one secondary in the most recent warbond from Helldivers 2 called the Polar Patriots warbond. Now, to say that the reception toward these weapons is mixed is really an understatement because it is pretty bad in my opinion. A lot of people are pretty unhappy with the quality control and the testing of these weapons because it just doesn't feel like Arrowhead put a lot of work into this and they focus more on getting the content out. Now again, we don't personally know Arrowhead's exact testing and quality control, we can only assume, but just based on what we're seeing from the fact that the Tenderizer is not the correct color and the fact that most of these weapons suffer from the old balancing, weapon balancing issue where they don't get full ammo on a resupply, it's safe to say that there was some things missed before the warbond released. Anyways, I did a brief video before this talking about my just general thoughts on each weapon, and I had noted in there that I wanted to go in more detail in a separate video talking about each primary and the secondary, just because I couldn't do it in that video. So this is that video. If you saw that previous video, you know some of these, but there is a ton of friggin' notes that I have for each weapon. So how I wanted this to work is I wanted to do it in a ranking type format, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna break this rank into 4 different categories. And these 4 categories are the weapon's overall usefulness, effectiveness, and performance. Then we're going to talk about the weapon's uniqueness, the best use cases for the weapon, the overall fun factor for the weapon, and just in general, we're going to give it a final overall grade based on all 4 of those factors. Anyways, I don't want to waste any more time. We have a lot to cover. Let's get into it. The AR-61 Tenderizer has a damage of 60, the capacity is 35, the reserve ammo is 10 clips, the recoil is 10, the fire rate is 600, and the penetration is light armor penetration. Have you ever used a meat tenderizer when cooking proteins? I mean, you smack and you flatten out the meat or the chicken or whatever you're using with some spices and things like that. It gets it ready to cook. Well, that's what the Tenderizer does. All it does is just beat up the enemies and gets it ready to be killed by something else because this thing is just woefully underpowered, just like a lot of the other assault rifles in Helldivers 2. This weapon bears a lot of similarities to the base AR-23 Liberator. The only differences are that the Tenderizer has 5 less recoil, less capacity, and a slower fire rate, and on top of that, it doesn't have medium armor penetration. So let that sink in. Why would you use this Tenderizer over the far superior AR-23 Liberator? I mean, that just doesn't make sense, right? And all in all, this weapon just needs something to make it unique when compared to the rest of the assault rifles, heck, even the rest of the weapons in the game for it to even matter or even come up in the potential use cases for most Helldivers, because currently in its current state, it has 0 upside in using it. So talking about its overall usefulness, effectiveness, and performance, I would give this overall a D. It kills stuff, but in the slowest, most inefficient way possible. You're chewing through ammo when you're using this thing because it takes so many bullets to kill things. I mean, it's decently effective against light armor units, but struggles against some of the higher tier light armored units and definitely struggles against the medium armored units because you're having to aim for specific weak spots. And it doesn't stun anything, so it's going to be difficult to use. The scope is nice, the recoil pattern feels pretty predictable, which is nice, and I don't know, this weapon just needs a lot of work to be a viable option for most Helldivers. So talking about the overall weapon's uniqueness, I would give it a C. The name sounds badass, I like the Tenderizer, is pretty cool, and the sound and the punch you get from this weapon is really good. I think that they did a great job making this weapon feel heavy, but again, it feels heavy, but it's weak. I don't get it. So the best use cases, this is a F when you're fighting the bots and a D when you're fighting the bugs. This weapon struggles badly with the bots, more specifically because of the light armor penetration. You cannot stun Devastators at all, and trying to hit their weak spots, especially the one with the shield, is pretty much impossible because these things are shooting at you and you can't do anything because you can't punch through any of their armor. And there are many other examples in the game of this because you can think of all the situations where you're fighting something with medium armor or even the Brood Commanders or anything like that. It's just not effective against the bots at all, in my opinion, and it's marginally effective against the bugs. That's why I gave it a D. All right, so based on the 4 categories I just discussed, the overall ranking I'm gonna have to give the Tenderizer is a easy D tier. Seriously, this weapon needs a damage buff and medium armor penetration just to be competitive with the ARs. And the ARs are not really in a good spot, so it's not even going to compete with any of the weapons in Helldivers 2 until it gets at least a little bit more damage and medium armor penetration to set it apart from the ARs in the category. The SMG-72 Pummeler has a damage of 65, the capacity is 45, the reserve ammo is 7 clips, the recoil is 10, the fire rate is 45, the penetration is light armor penetration, and this is a one-handed weapon. All right, so if you love stun locking enemies, there is probably no better weapon in the game currently than this weapon at doing that. This is a concussive type weapon, and based on the other examples we have of concussive weapons, which there's only one, which is the Liberator concussive, I was not overall super excited to try this weapon out. However, I was sorely mistaken because this weapon is so freaking satisfying to use. No, this weapon does not have medium armor penetration, but who the freak cares? This weapon stun locks the majority of enemies in the game outside of the really huge elites. Just to give you a few examples, with chargers, if there's an exposed spot on its back or its legs, you can stun lock it. If you hit a bile spewer or a nursing spewer in the face, you can stun lock them. You can stun lock stalkers, you can stun lock devastators. Obviously, this doesn't work again against the big boys like the Bile Titans or the Hulks or something like that. I mean, even with the Hulks, actually, technically, you can shoot them in the back and it does stun lock them a bit. But yeah, it's just, this weapon is just so versatile for that. One of my new favorite things to do with this weapon is I love to just be shooting into a crowd of Terminids, just making them flinch and stun lock a little bit, and then throwing the new Impact's incendiary grenade and just watching them burn. It's just so satisfying in my opinion. On top of everything I just said, this thing only has 5 less damage when compared to the Defender SMG, which makes this not only extremely effective at crowd controlling, but it's not half bad in terms of damage. It really does a lot more damage than you would think. Overall, this is probably the new king of crowd control weapons in this game, and I never thought I would find a weapon like that useful because most weapons I just wanted to kill the thing I'm shooting at. But for this one, it's just kind of satisfying just to watch them slowly die while they're flinching to death. It's just really cool in my opinion. So for the overall usefulness, effectiveness, and performance of this weapon, this is by far an S tier. The crowd control capabilities of this weapon on top of the consistent damage output just make this weapon incredibly effective to use, as well as you have a high magazine capacity and the recoil is very predictable, which makes this weapon a dream to use when you're aiming outside or firing from third person. Just overall, the performance of this weapon is just fantastic. The weapon's uniqueness is also an S tier. It's a very unique weapon because we only have 2 concussive weapons currently in the game, and this one by far absolutely destroys that Liberator concussive rifle. And to take this up a notch, you can use this with the ballistic shield against the bots. It's really satisfying to use, as well as you can use this while you're sprinting and shoot behind you. It's just really unique in my opinion. So the best use case scenarios is that this is an S tier against the bugs and an A tier against the bots. Now a lot of the bots require a little bit more precision to hit the weak spots when compared to the bugs, so the ease of use against the bots is a bit higher when compared to the bugs. Now this is great against berserkers and decent against devastators, and it works against the Hulk's vents a bit. But the shining case for this is when you're using the ballistic shield against the bots. It's actually insanely fun. The biggest problem with this weapon against the bots is that it just does not do well at multitasking because it does take a little bit more time to kill enemies when compared to other weapons, and the light armor pen does hold it back. But against the bugs, honestly, this is by far one of the best weapons in the game and definitely one of my top choices because of its effectiveness against the bugs. So for the fun factor, this is easily an S tier in my opinion. This thing is so much fun to use and is now in my top 5 favorite choices when I'm fighting the bugs especially. So no surprise, my overall ranking for this weapon is an S tier. This is by far the biggest surprise from the warbond. I was not expecting to enjoy this weapon at all, and I'm praying, Arrowhead, please, 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 please do not nerf this weapon. It's in a perfect spot right now. It's not overpowered. It's where it needs to be. Please leave this weapon alone. The PLAS-101 Purifier has a damage of 250. The capacity is 15 rounds. The reserve ammo is 6 clips. The recoil is 20. The fire rate is 250. And the penetration is medium armor penetration. All right, so this is probably the most hyped weapon for this new warbond. And I hate to say, but this is probably the most disappointing. And it's for a wide variety of reasons. But honestly, the biggest one is I think this weapon was completely miscategorized by Arrowhead. This weapon should be a sniper type weapon by its design, its look, and the way it feels. This weapon has the damage, it has the scope, it has the fire rate, it has the precision like a sniper plasma weapon. It has all the characteristics of it. However, you don't get any scoping options, and the damage feels weak and very inconsistent at times. Look, I get it. There is splash damage, so it's supposed to have some sort of AoE effect, and visually you can see that the splash is quite large. However, it does not feel as effective as the Plasma Punisher shotgun, even though they have the same damage output according to the tooltip. Honestly, I'm left here just scratching my head about what this weapon is trying to be. It feels like it's supposed to be a sniper, has the charge mechanics of a railgun, has a splash damage of a Plasma Punisher, but performs much worse than every single one of those things. So what is this weapon really trying to do, in my opinion? So let's talk about its overall usefulness, effectiveness, and performance. This is overall a D for me, just right out of the gates. And I feel like most people in the comment sections are going to be like, oh, it's a skill issue, you don't know how to use it, whatever. And I'm sorry, if shooting a Devastator in the face or shooting a Spewer enemy in the face is a skill issue thing, then I don't know. I mean, I don't obviously know how to play this game, but it just feels like it's not strong enough in a lot of situations. Single target, it takes way too many shots to kill sometimes even light armor enemies. With the AoE, it barely tickles a lot of enemies. I mean, it does decent damage, but it's not consistent enough. And then overall, that's just the problem, is that this weapon just needs better damage consistency. And I don't really know what the answer is. Maybe making the AoE more isolated. I don't know, it just needs something to make it just a little bit more focused and consistent on its damage. And the other thing too is that this weapon just needs a better payoff when you charge this weapon to full, like the railgun, for example. When you charge the railgun up, it does way more damage. And with this weapon, it does the same damage no matter what the charge is. So I don't know, it just makes me scratch my head even more. So for this weapon's uniqueness, I would give it a B tier. This weapon looks badass, it sounds badass, and it has a lot of unique properties. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of the Gauss rifle from Fallout New Vegas, and it reminds me of fusion rifles from Destiny 2. So it fulfills a lot of that fantasy vibe that I look for in a game like Helldivers 2. But I don't know, just in this landscape of weapons we have available to us in Helldivers 2, this just does not fulfill a lot of things that we're looking for in terms of what we're trying to use to kill the enemies the most efficiently, if you get what I'm saying. So for the best use cases, this weapon is a D against the bugs, and it's also a D against the bots. There are far better options for both sides to use, honestly, in the game, and this weapon at times feels like a massive liability with the charge mechanic. When you're getting swarmed by bugs, it's difficult to get the weapon charged enough, and you may splash AoE yourself and hurt yourself, and you'll get overwhelmed and killed by the bugs. When you're dealing with some of the enemies that are shooting at you, they may interrupt you or hit you, and you don't get a shot off properly while this thing is charging. So I don't know, like, I mean, again, there's just far better options in the game currently, and just, you're not gonna run this over a lot of other things. So for the fun factor, this is also, unfortunately, a D. This weapon, just like the Tenderizer, is extremely painful to use. It's not fun. The charging mechanic feels very cumbersome and has no reward for you doing that extra little bit of charge. So I don't know, plain and simple, this weapon is just not fun to use. So my overall ranking for this weapon based on the categories is I would give it an overall D tier. Arrowhead needs to find a firm identity on this weapon because it currently feels like a sniper rifle, a shotgun, a railgun, and a plasma rifle all at once, and fails to compare to any of those options because it's much worse than all those options. The P113 Verdict has a damage of 125, the capacity is 10 rounds, the reserve ammo is 8 clips, the recoil is 40, the fire rate is 450, and the penetration is light armor penetration. This weapon is one of the most, if not the most, middle of the road weapons in the game. And I don't say that sarcastically, I'm being 100% serious. It's a solid secondary. Yet the Senator, Redeemer, and the grenade pistol all rank above that in terms of priority. Now this is better than obviously the laser pistol and the base pistol, which even the base pistol in some situations might be a little bit better, but I'm gonna give it the sake of the argument of just saying it's middle of the road here. Now, if this weapon rolled with medium armor penetration like a lot of people predicted prior to the warbond releasing, this would easily be a top 3 secondary in the game, taking the place for the Senator, because it would have all the better properties compared to the Senator. I feel like this weapon was supposed to fill that Desert Eagle-like role in this game. It's slightly weaker than the Senator, but it made up for it in its faster reload and the larger capacity. However, in its current state, again, I just can't recommend that people take this over the better 3 options, which is the grenade pistol, the Redeemer, and the Senator, because all those do uniquely gifted things that will help you in a pinch, which is what a secondary is supposed to do. This one just is okay. It's middle of the road, like I said. All right, so talking about its overall usefulness, effectiveness, and its performance, this is a B tier because the damage is good. It's not bad. I like the damage. It's just below the Senator in terms of damage. The recoil and performance of this weapon are both great. It's great against light armored units and for cleanup duty. I've already mentioned it doesn't come with medium armor penetration, which was really disappointing, so it's not very good against medium armored units. And unfortunately, the magazine feels very, 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 very small. So for the weapon's uniqueness, I'm gonna give it a C tier. This weapon sounds amazing and it has that really cool factor, if that makes sense. Outside of that though, there's really no reason to take this again above the 3 options I've already listed prior. And it doesn't offer anything more unique when compared to those, in my opinion, because the grenade pistol has the utility of being able to take out fabricators and close bug holes. The Senator is just a freaking revolver that has medium armor penetration. It's very useful. And the Redeemer is the best cleanup weapon in the game. You get it in a pinch, the Redeemer just blows everything away. It's absolutely fantastic. This weapon just doesn't have a place when compared to those 3. So for the best use cases, this is a B tier against the bugs and a C tier against the bots. It does decent work against most of the enemies in the bug army, especially if you're hitting the weak spot. So if you get behind, like the Hive Guards, for example, it does okay. So with the bots, outside of the normal rank and file light armor enemies, it becomes harder to use. The weak spots are a lot smaller on the bots, so this weapon requires a lot of precision. And since there's no stun factor with this weapon, you're going to be getting interrupted a lot, so it's just pretty difficult to use against the bots, in my opinion, when you're talking about taking out Devastators or anything like that. For the fun factor, I'm going to give it a C tier overall because it's fun from the standpoint it does hit pretty hard. However, it's not fun because it's not a reliable assistant when you need it, because when you need a secondary a lot of times is to be able to do something or get you out of a situation. And this weapon doesn't do that better than some of the other weapons in the secondary category. So my overall ranking for this weapon is a C tier. This weapon has so much freaking potential, but the only thing they have to do is give this thing medium armor penetration, and this will considerably change the performance of this weapon and make it a top tier secondary in the game. All right, so that's all my thoughts on every single weapon you get in the Polar Patriots Warbond. Again, with outside of the SMG, which is a god tier weapon in this game, all the other weapons are, they're so middle of the road or just not worth using, and it's just very sad in my opinion because these weapons have some potential to be great. Anyways, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.